Your Steve Jones Show podcast is loading now. The Steve Jones Show podcast is sponsored by Sunbury Motors, North 4th Street in Sunbury, and Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf.
The outstanding Mark Brennan joins us. Mark, first of all, welcome, and congrats to your daughter Grace on the great job she did. Camera all season long. She took some phenomenal shots.
I appreciate it, Steve. As a long-suffering Phillies fan, I would take like a 60-game series.
Yeah.
But with respect to Grace, our primary photographer, Harvey Levine, was out with an injury, but he was still able to help her significantly. And one of the great things is all the pro photographers really pitched in and helped her. So she did a nice job, but the sense of community, even from competitors, helping a young person was just really cool and heartening to see. So I thank you very much.
Yeah, it's that's great, and it is a really close-knit fraternity. There's no getting around it. All right, so let's get to the Penn State news of it. Let's start with the bowl game. Penn State hasn't been there in 11 years. What kind of factor do you think maybe that ended up playing in the decision?
Yeah, I think that's big. I also think the fact that Penn State's a huge television draw. I mean, there's no two ways about it. You know, I don't know if people realize this, but as up and down as this past season was, Penn State was on national ABC telecast 6 times. That's a program record. I mean, that's telling you something. ABC is not putting Penn State on just because it likes Penn State, right? ABC is putting Penn State on 6 times because Penn State is generating viewers.
Right.
And I think when you're the Outback Bowl, what's the key for the Outback Bowl? Number one, to try to get fans there. I think with Arkansas being involved, that'll really help. And obviously there are a lot of Penn State alumni in Florida, but also generating television viewership. And I know there's other games going on at that time, but you know, to me, it's another example of Penn State almost always gets the best possible bowl available.
Right.
Almost always. You know, it doesn't happen every single time, but in the vast majority of situations, you know, we're not talking about playoffs. We're talking about when the bowls have to make the decision based on how many fans are going to be there, based on the television viewership. Penn State has the authentics on that, and it has the history to back it up.
Right. There's no question about that. And you can just see the numbers, just the pure numbers, that when Penn State's there, they draw. And that makes a big difference. Now the question will be, who will be there? You know, the vast majority of them will be there. Is this something that we won't probably find out until we get to probably a bowl media day or something like that? Yeah,
that's my guess. You know, I really hope like a Jahan Dotson plays, just because he's been such a joy to watch.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would understand it if he didn't. But, you know, the guy that I thought handled this type of situation really well was Saquon.
Yes, exactly.
They limited what he did, gave Miles Sanders more carries, but he still played. He still represented the program and represented the program extremely well at the Fiesta Bowl. And, you know, I would hope that, you know, for some of the better players, if they're trying to make those decisions, maybe they look at how Saquon handled it. And obviously it didn't hurt him at all. And I think that worked out really well. So, you know, from my own selfish perspective, seeing a guy like Dotson play one more time, I think would be great, but I would also understand it if he decided to not do it.
What do you think about the matchup with Arkansas?
I haven't looked into Arkansas enough yet. You know, we're still trying to look at dealing with hoop stuff and Penn State stuff and the coaching searches and who's going where and all that that sort of stuff, the transfer portal, all of that stuff. But you know what I like is it's 2 traditional programs. And I think that was part of what went into the matchup as well.
That have never played.
I couldn't believe that. Did you know that? I mean,
yes, I did.
Know that,
no, I knew that.
Everything.
But I did know that.
I figured at some point in the 60s or the 70s, you know, Joe would have played them somewhere. But it's amazing that it never happened. And it's, you know, I guess Arkansas hasn't quite been at the same level as Penn State for a lot of years. and I don't mean that as a knock, but I mean, Arkansas hasn't really been to the Outback Bowl, right? I mean,
they've never gone.
It's incredible to think, right? So when you think of all the times Penn State's played at Tennessee, in a bowl game, it just to me it kind of blows my mind that they've never played, and I really like that aspect of it. I know that it's been, excuse me, on a lot of these trips, it's been fun getting to know the media and the fans from places like Tennessee, from LSU, because they're really good fans. They really get after it, and I think there's a mutual respect. And so that part of it I'm looking forward to. I know, our writer down at the guy who runs our Arkansas site, it's a tremendous site. He does a great job. I've known him for a while. So I think fans getting to know fans from the respective schools is going to be a big part of this.
Now, of course, obviously, Brent Pry is at Virginia Tech. Everybody's waiting to see what happens with Anthony Poindexter. Any read on the staff right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm anxious to see what they do with the defensive coordinator position because, as you know, there are some really good people on this staff. I mean, I love Terry Smith. I think he's been a great representative. Would love to see him get an opportunity. But I also know that James Franklin has to do his due diligence and look outside the program. But the one thing I would say, Steve, is that James, what he's done, and I haven't posted it yet because I'm waiting for all this to shake out, but the coaching tree he's developed in 8 years has been mind-blowing. Yeah. I mean, it really is. I mean, people could be critical of performance in tight games or anything else, but, now you're looking at it's 4 BCS coaches, head coaches. Mm-hmm. I mean, and it could be 5, depending on what happens with Poindexter. I mean, that's unbelievable.
I know. Yeah, it really is.
You look at guys who have gone on to be coordinators as well. I mean, it's pretty impressive what he's been able to do. And why I bring that up, not just to praise James Franklin, but I think what he's done is he's made Penn State an attractive place for coaches to go because they know they can use that to help further their careers. Yeah. And let's face it, that's what, as much as people may not like it, as much as people got used to coaches being around forever, it doesn't happen anymore. It just doesn't. You look at the vast majority of well-respected coaches, assistant coaches, you go look at their wiki page and see everywhere they've been. And now it's even happening with head coaches. I mean, Lincoln Riley, Kelly. I mean, guys just aren't staying places for a long time. And so to me, it's important as a head coach that the best assistant coaches are able to look and say, okay, well, what has he done? How has he helped prepare coaches to take that next step? And I think that's one of the most underrated parts of James Franklin that I do not think people appreciate is the infrastructure that he's built, the attention to detail, to every little detail. Why is that important? Well, it's important for all the things that we were talking about before James Franklin got his extension, but it's also important because the people who work with him realize what it takes. Brent Pry, you think when Brent Pry went and interviewed with Virginia Tech that he wasn't relying heavily, not just on X's and O's. Listen, there are a lot of great X's and O's coaches out there. Mm-hmm. But you need guys who are going to be able to tell you what the plan is for recruiting, what your vision is for the future of the infrastructure of the team and facilities and all of those different things. And James Franklin as well as anybody, and you're around him enough to understand the insane, and I mean that in a good way, attention to detail that man has. Yep. And that's what people are looking for anymore in coordinators and head coaches, and that's why this has been a good launching pad for people.
Right, because they pick up on that example, and believe me, James is always looking around saying, did I miss something? And he'll go through it and he'll rack his brain until he finds what he may have missed or best practice that he needs to go with, and that rubs off on other coaches.
And I would argue, Steve, that sometimes that may be to a fault where he is so invested in every aspect of the program that maybe it's a little bit too much. And that's me speaking. I respect him immensely as a person, as a coach. But I wonder if sometimes if it wouldn't be better if he could turn his mind off and not focus about every single detail. But that's never going to happen because that's the way he's wired.
No, let's go back to an answer he gave a year ago. A year ago with COVID, he was so and then he finally said, look, I've told the doctors and the trainers, you've got to take care of it. I got to coach. So, I mean, so there's a point where he realizes, too, that, hey, wait a minute, I can't be too invested. I got to be in that part of it. I've got to rely on the professionals to do it. And he did that last year. So that, if everyone remembers the answer he gave on that.
Yeah, and that's a great example, sure.
Yep. If I ain't starting, I'm departing. Welcome to the transfer portal. Any surprises with Penn State so far?
No, I'm actually surprised there hasn't been more motion. You know, I wonder if there aren't some players who are waiting to graduate and that sort of thing, which is understandable. And people have to realize that the portal, and we've seen it with Penn State players, you know, there are many instances where guys are leaving, and it's a win-win for the player and for Penn State to open up scholarships. And that's not a knock on the players. Some players who just aren't going to make an impact at this level are able to go to a different level. Now, I'm not saying that was the case with Will Levis, but Kuntz, the tight end, you know, he was going to have trouble playing a lot. So you know, he ends up going with Ricky Ronnie and has a really good year. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. So I think you might see more action. I think we might see some more action when the spring semester, if I could spit it out, gets here. Because you have to remember that for these players, if they want to graduate next spring, they can't enter the portal. Graduate from Penn State next spring, they can't enter the portal now. I mean, it just wouldn't make sense. So you enroll for the spring, and that's why we see early in the spring semester, and it's not the greatest thing, but it's the way the system is.
Right.
Once the players enrolled for the spring and Penn State has committed to paying for their tuition, then you see some guys popping into the portal. Is that right? I don't know, but it's the way the system is, and don't blame the player. Hate on the system. Don't hate on the player for the way that works.
Exactly.
That's the way it is.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Don't hate on the player for them looking around saying, okay, this is how it works. I got to make it work for me. Basketball. Obviously, you haven't really had a chance to see Greg Lee. Obviously, I have. But, you know.
Yeah.
But just having another capable, bigger body out there, what can that mean, do you think, for Penn State?
Yeah, you know, I think, and we saw it with Jelani White, right?
Yeah.
That early in the season, he was an offensive rebounding machine, but now that the competition has gotten better, he's so thin. And it's not as if Greg Lee is a 240-pounder, but whatever he weighs, he looks like he's more put together.
He's put together. He's put together, and I'm talking. He's a good rebounder, Mark. He really is. And
so even just having somebody beyond what you just need, it's too much for John Harrar. You know, I mean, he's out there in the level that he plays at, the amount of effort that he puts out. He is never going to be able to play much more than 30 minutes. And ideally, you'd like to be able to play him 25. And that's not a knock on him. It's because he's in there, you know, being as physical as anybody could possibly be, and you know it's only going to get worse when they get into the grind of the Big Ten schedule. So, yeah, I mean, if and when he's able to come back, and, you know, I'm anxious to see what if and when Scott is able to play. Right. Can he help you a little bit, because he's not the tallest guy, but he's got some beef to him.
Right.
But for now,
and he's a good passer too, Mark. Very good passer.
Yeah. But for now, I mean, my hat goes off to Harrar, to John, because he is the physicality that he's playing with is just unbelievable. And listen, we know what he's about offensively, but I think he's actually gotten better at finishing around the rim and stuff. Yes. Again, that's going to be more difficult against the bigger opponents. But you know, when you have him out there basically with four guards a lot of times, that's a challenge.
Yet, since probably about halftime of the Cornell game, since Jalen Pickett has looked like Jalen Pickett, what does he mean to what they're doing out there at both ends of the floor?
Yeah, and I thought that Micah Shrewsbury made a great point, is that everybody tends to focus in on what he's doing offensively, but he did a really nice job defensively against Ohio State. And there were some really talented players out there, as you know, for Ohio State. But I think just a level of consistency. And that's what's missing from Sessoms recently. I mean,
right.
You know, he was really consistent through the first 5 games of the 4 or 5 games of the season, and now you're not seeing that consistency. And that's where – and listen, I completely get it, because I think at the end of the day we have to remember that you are still dealing with this mishmash of players from all different areas.
Yep.
And – it's kind of amazing that they are where they are at this point. I know people complain, they should have won more games, but you know, I would argue that this hasn't been the easiest juggling act. And I think when we found out that the sickness, what that played in that UMass game.
Yeah.
But yeah, and with respect to Pickett, having a consistent player out there, it just is so important that you know what you're going to get from somebody on both ends of the floor, night in and night out, because Seth Lundy is going to be up and down. We've seen that.
Yeah.
Ideally, you'd like him to be more consistent. Sessoms has been up and down. So I think if you can get Pickett to be that one consistent force, and then you hope that one of those other guys in the backcourt is going to be consistent, or, you know, the backcourt or even small forward where Lundy's playing. Well, I guess he's actually playing big forward a lot, but you get my point.
Yep.
They just need a couple guys to be consistent. You can't have just one guy being consistent. You can't.
Mark, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you very much.
Yep, no problem. I appreciate it. I'll see you tonight, Steve.